There is a competitive element here. I mean, if you are not using it, you can decide not to use it, and that's fine. But somebody who's using it to amplify their productivity is going to be done in 3 hours when you're working 8. We are beginning to move beyond these silos within a company to thinking about AI as an enterprise-wide sort of initiative, where all of these different silos can be connected together. And that's what AI centricity actually means. Now, why is it now possible as compared to before? Is that the main difference is that much of the work in enterprises gets done using natural language. And, the large language model revolution is giving us a very good opportunity to be able to understand this natural language and to enable better communication across different silos in the organization. Right?
Many companies claim to be data-driven, but few are very truly AI-centered. How in the supply chain space can businesses shift from using data, letting them just inform them of decisions versus AI guiding decisions?
Moving from the data visibility to actually decision making has never been that easy, to be honest.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Summit Speaks podcast series, where innovation meets technology. Today, we have Dr. Bala, a professor of AI and analytics at the Leavey School of Business, where I actually did my EMBA, and the co-author of the AI-Centered Enterprise, Reshaping Organizations with Context-Aware AI. Dr. Bala is globally recognized for his research in pricing, market design, and supply chain strategy for dynamic markets. He has led data science initiatives for Grand Canal, later acquired by C.H. Robinson and Andela, a global talent marketplace backed by Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and SoftBank. He now co-leads Prometheus Lab on AI and business and co-founded Samvid AI, a Agentic AI startup transforming contract intelligence and pricing governance. Welcome, Dr. Bala. Thank you for being on. Anything else you'd like to share?
Well, it's been a long journey for me when it comes to AI. I've been working on some of these problems for a very long time. And yet there is so much more to learn. And with all the new waves of technology, last 2 years have been actually sort of the most exciting of my life in both building Samvid as well as doing research on understanding how these new forms of AI can actually be implemented in companies, right? So, and that's what the book is about. So really looking forward to our conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for being on. Yeah. So I think you kind of set a perfect segue into the AI-centered enterprise. So you've spent several years kind of helping organizations rethink how to operate in this new AI world. But if you could give us a little bit more insight as to what it truly means to be AI-centered.
So AI models have been implemented in practice now for at least a couple of decades in different forms. But the AI models that have traditionally been used were narrower. For example, you could think about using it for forecasting demand, figuring out how to design your supply chain network, even in other areas beyond supply chains, how to optimize your ad campaigns, all of those topics. The difference is that we are beginning to move beyond these silos within a company to thinking about AI as an enterprise-wide sort of initiative, where all of these different silos can be connected together. And that's what AI centricity actually means. Now, why is it now possible as compared to before? Is that the main difference is that much of the work in enterprises gets done using natural language. And, the large language model revolution has actually been giving us a very good opportunity to be able to understand this natural language and to enable better communication across different silos in the organization. So that really is what AI centricity means in terms of being able to use these newer tools and technologies to be able to connect the dots across different parts of the organization and help people collaborate better, right? Not just improve a particular task that they're doing.
Yeah.
But this presents many challenges as well, and as we'll talk about in the course of this discussion.
Absolutely. From my time in the tech space, large language models have been around for forever, but now the interconnectedness and the amount of compute power that we have compared to even 10, 15 years ago is incredible. And I think that's what's really driving. And then some of this decentralization of this knowledge and data, I think really has helped companies conceptualize it for themselves, when a lot of this was a very pie in the sky type of world where, only the very, very smart data scientists or huge tech companies could afford to do this. Now it's becoming a little bit more decentralized. So I really, and people can imagine themselves in an AI centered space. So
yeah. Absolutely.
Kind of talking about that data-driven approach, many companies claim to be data-driven, but few are very truly AI-centered. How in the supply chain space can businesses shift from using just data letting them just inform them of decisions versus AI guiding decisions?
That's a great question, Manjot, because often enough people think that just because they're become data enabled, they have also become AI centered, and that's not always the case. So to give you a concrete example, it's the first challenge that companies had was to actually collect data in different forms and actually make it visible for use by managers and others who had to make decisions of different kinds. Moving from the data visibility to actually decision making has never been that easy, to be honest, because it requires a lot of effort to process the data, convert it into a form that can be that is consumable by a user, and then applying predictive and prescriptive tools to that data to actually make sense of it and sort of enable the user to make a decision is actually a very complex process. I mean, entire generations of companies have been built on this principle, right? Trying to build these data pipelines, trying to build these algorithms, trying to make all of this happen. And so true AI centricity is not just about data visibility. It's about sort of amplifying what the decision maker actually do in terms of the
Right.
data. That amplification is something that we haven't been able to get to yet until more recently, because it's all been about sort of, can I make this data visible? And then the human being has to put in a lot of effort to sort of make that final decision, right? And
Yeah.
so I think what AI centricity really means as compared to being data driven is allowing sort of like putting in place autonomous tools that can make the decision maker amplify their ability to sort of make better decisions.
Yeah. I think some of the challenge is the way I think about AI sometimes is it's an incredible tool, but you don't know sometimes how to harness that power in the right way. And I think you're alluding to it. Some of the analytics moving away from just descriptive to more of the predictive and prescriptive models, that continues to be some of the biggest challenges, especially in supply chain, where data is so segregated, it's so all over the place, and just getting all of that to make sense so that you can actually make a real-time decision is sometimes some of the biggest challenge, especially in the ocean of data and how fluid supply chain data really is and how many variables you have to take into account, from external factors to internal company factors and organizational factors. So very, very interesting concept. I know we're going to dive much deeper into this.
Right. And to be fair, I think the real power of AI is in sort of taking that entire sort of chain of events. And if we are able to compress that and move from acquisition of data to actually sort of
Yeah.
the predictive models faster and faster, that's when I think we have really accomplished what we set out to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So shifting gears a bit, but in your academic perspective, and I know your time at Santa Clara with analytics and AI, what patterns do you see in how businesses are successfully adopting the AI first mindset?
Yeah. Once again, a wonderful question, very relevant to our times. In my experience, traditionally, the way AI worked was a particular business user identified a problem. They had sort of a corresponding stakeholder on the technology department or division or organization within the larger company, and they work together to come up with sort of some sort of a model or an approach to actually implement the solution, right? Now, this could be very limited in terms of the silo in which it operates. Now, the what that means really is that the implementation of AI were often rolled into sort of the head of IT or head of technology, and
Right.
they were the ones responsible for it, and kind of the buck stopped with them in a sense. The landscape has dramatically shifted today. If you talk to even medium-sized or even smaller companies in the supply chain space and across the board, if you talk to the CEOs and even boards of these companies, there is now an increasing anxiety about how we actually get ahead of the competition by using AI better. So the pressure that's coming in today in terms of using AI is very top down. And that sort of gives me hope to the extent that for the first time, being AI centered actually has some, CXO level sort of validation
Right.
and sort of the support. And what that means is that we can now think about involving everybody in the organization as part of this AI centered vision.
Totally. Yeah.
But having said that, I think the challenge still remains. Just because, it's coming top down doesn't mean that it's going to happen overnight. It also has to be accompanied by the right level of change management,
Hmm.
the right level of alignment of technology tools, and in fact, even recognition of what exactly are our business priorities
Yeah,
and how exactly we should be implementing them. And so when you put all that together, I would say that the AI-centered enterprise is a vision that is very much within sight today, which was not the case because of the support it's receiving from top management. At the same time that we have lots and lots of challenges to sort of solve before we actually get there.
of course, of course. I think you alluded to this, but it seems like companies no longer are running; they're sprinting to this. What are some of the challenges that you see where it feels like we might be putting the cart in front of the horse at times, like where it's that some of this technology hasn't been fully thought through or fleshed out, but there's a mad race to adoption, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so what would you say to folks that like do want to be on that precipice and cutting edge, but also, as a business, you need to make some strategic decisions. And sometimes you're planning, 2, 3, 5 years out, and this technology is changing like overnight.
Yeah.
And so how
Yeah.
how do you balance that in this world?
Right. So let's not worry about the technological change for a minute, right? Let's think about the technology we have and how we might go about implementing it. I see two pitfalls potentially. One is the pressure to adopt sometimes forces companies to jump into POCs without the right levels of data governance put in place, and also thinking about what it means for the organization once these tools come into play. And so then you start hearing these stories about agents being deployed at scale over a
Hmm.
very short time scale, and then they don't work the way they are supposed to work. And then there is this backlash that happens. And then you have these articles which talk about 95% of these projects failing, right? So like the MIT
Right.
school.
Yes.
I think it's really more a function of the haste in which something was implemented, right? Giving due care to like the governance issues involved and the change management involved. So that's one issue. The second issue is there is sometimes, many times, I think, as the companies get larger, there is an anchoring effect where you may have a technology stack. In fact, companies often have multiple technology stacks. Many of them, they mushroom over time because different technologies work well for different purposes and different groups want it for different reasons.
Hmm.
And once you start paying for a certain technology, there might be an anchoring effect where you say, oh, okay, can we just slap AI onto this existing technology and just
Yep.
make it work?
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. And this is a different kind of implementation problem because what then happens because of that is you sort of get stuck in, you're not really, there hasn't been a rethink of exactly what our priorities are and how we should go about getting there. It's more been like, let's take what we have and just slap AI on it and then hope for the best.
Totally. Yeah.
I think neither of these approaches actually is effective. I think the right approach in my mind is there has to be sort of a strategic process that first comes in where you think through exactly what your business priorities are, exactly what the governance roadmap is going to be in order to make this happen, and then figure out exactly what the tools and technologies would be required to kind of make all of this happen. I think so. There is got to be some more thought. I know there is this anxiety, there is this need for speed. At the same time, I think speed, you can be quick without actually being hasty, right? I think so.
Right.
I think there is a
Yep.
fine line between those two things.
Absolutely. And yeah, nowadays that line seems to get a little bit blurry, especially with companies in this space for sure. So kind of getting a little bit more narrow just into the supply chain space. So I know your startup Samvid is building autonomous agents for the logistics and supply chain management space. But if you could kind of give us a little bit more around that story, what inspired that, and what that direction was.
Right. So for the longest time, I was an academic working on, um, you know, research applied to some of these areas. When I would work with companies, it would be mostly about like data exchange and so on for research purposes.
Hmm.
About a decade ago, my current co-founder Arun Rao and I it was his previous company that I actually got involved with, where as a chief scientist, and where we started building a lot of these predictive tools on top of a baseline platform which was focused on e-commerce, logistics, analytics, right?
Hmm.
And that started off this entire journey where I worked there, and that company got acquired by Robinson. At Robinson, I worked across different divisions, and then of course at Andela as well, which is a talent marketplace, very different sort of environment. And if I look at the unifying theme across all of these, is that there were some problems that were very difficult to solve back then. Like,
Yes.
so to give you an example, in a company like Robinson, for instance, sure, you can, if a lot of I worked a lot on sort of spot pricing algorithms for different
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
services.
I remember.
And and I think we might have talked about some of
We
those
talked about it in class. Yes.
in class, right? Yeah, absolutely. But a big space that I think was very difficult to sort of like tackle back then was a lot of the customers in the logistics space tend to be based on contracts, right? And the
Hmm.
reason it's based on contracts is because contracts give you price stability. And so in a sense, you might lose on some of the lose out on some of the advantages of like sort of like spot pricing, but you have a customer who's going to be here with you for the longer time because you're giving them a more assured price on many
Yep.
different lanes.
Yep. Yep.
Now, what does that mean? So that means that a lot of the transactions that are happening, that define how the prices and other kind of terms and conditions, they're written up in natural language. And
Hmm.
historically, it was like incredibly difficult to kind of like go back and actually understand what was happening with some of those terms and conditions. So, for example, if a sales rep is actually trying to negotiate a deal, they have no idea what kind of discounts they've given to a comparable customer, sort of in the past,
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
were buried in some contracts and there were like thousands of these, right? And so what we then said, and also traditionally the way to tackle some of these problems was you just send it over to like a team somewhere, hopefully like a low cost center where somebody could just read the document
Hmm.
and maybe and type in like key details into a database and do all of that, right? So it was very manual, very hard, and you couldn't go from like the data to like decision fast enough. And to me, that's a key metric to look at. So how fast can we go from data to decision, right? That's the key metric. And so our goal of starting Samvid was, it's really, now that large language models are available, GenAI is ubiquitous, it's improving. How can we use that to actually sort of
Hmm.
shrink that data to decision timeline? And that really is sort of our that was the motivation for starting this, right? And to me, and so which is why I think our primary focus is on looking at all the unstructured data that's available in the supply chain, like in natural language data, and actually sort of really start adding value to it. And once you start doing that, then you can start pulling in all the traditional sources of data on top of it as well. So right, go sort of in the reverse direction. I think it's like that's been pretty successful in the terms of like how we have gotten very far in terms of like being able to like really characterize some of this data very effectively.
That's awesome. I love the data to decision. I know it's in your book, but maybe like a data decision or something, brand it. But I think that concept, though, I think is the challenge that this industry is really struggling with. Is I've got all this massive data, but how do I actually make insightful decisions based on it? So that's an awesome.
And more importantly, insightful decisions quickly, right?
Quickly.
So one is that I can't even make the decision, which is because
Yes.
I can't even process the data well, which is you're basically saying the time from data to decision is infinite,
Right.
essentially. And and then even when you could make a decision, if it's going to take you like a week to get there,
Right.
it's that's not good enough. I mean, you need to be able to get there like within the hour, right? So that's the key.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're nailing it. So just kind of sticking to that theme of data from your experience, what parts of the supply chain do you think are going to benefit most? So I think we talked a little bit about some of the planning and routing and forecasting, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff around pricing and digital document processing and other things like that. Where do you see AI's kind of top 2 to 3 biggest impacts in the supply chain industry?
So I would say it's going to affect all of them eventually,
For
but
sure.
the progression is it's going to follow a certain trajectory. I think traditionally we've had many good implementations um, of AI in, let's say, routing, pricing, forecasting, and all of these areas. Very narrow areas where you had
Hmm.
relatively easy data availability in the form of structured data, and you could just tap into, let's say, a TMS or an ERP system, and you could actually get some valuable data and make sense of it. Now, the challenge with those, of course, was that I think that while there were many successful use cases, they were not widespread enough. They were not universal enough. It took sort of a progressive company to really sort of make things happen, and the average company found it very difficult. And to me, the main challenge, it goes back to sort of like this natural language idea, right? Which is that one, there was these huge sources of data that were untapped. For instance, I could make a decision about routing something, and then
Hmm.
maybe or let's take purchasing. I think it's a very where procurement, where I could say, okay, look, here's the supplier that I want to procure from based on operational metrics. But then your legal team comes back to you and says, hey, that's not feasible because there are all these legal clauses that we'll run into, and there is a significant legal risk in going with the supplier. And that information is really not being captured in any of the models that make that decision, because that lives in this legal document that this lawyer is looking at, right?
Right.
And so how do we merge those two things? And so if you could merge those two things, then you actually found a pathway to like more universal application. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of that is even the models that we had, I think they were very difficult to actually use. So for instance,
Yeah.
you could go into a system and you could say, look, there are three ways in which you can look at this problem. And then as a business user, I'm coming in and saying, hey, there was this big the Suez Canal shut down. There was this big supply disruption. And because of this, I'm going to have to rethink how to like reallocate my existing supply, given that it's going to be very limited in scope. But there was no mechanism for me to go to the system and say, okay, here is this change that happened. And just describe the change, maybe even in words. I can say, here is my description. So, here's the situation. Here's what's really happened. And can you help me in reallocating my resources in some way? And there was no way to do that traditionally, right? And that is going to completely, because of our ability to produce natural languages, to understand that and to then reformulate the underlying problem, I think that is going to be a game changer. So I think both this access to data and this ability to be flexible with to how you solve problems, that's going to be a game changer. My eventual prediction is that it's going to be universal. I think it's going to affect every aspect of the supply chain. That's the AI centricity, but it's not going to be overnight. I think it'll depend a lot on what data sources we can really genuinely tap into, how much organizational will there is to actually move in that direction, and on so many other factors. And yeah, as we,
Totally. Absolutely. And I think a lot of the, like, at least so far the conversation, we've been talking a lot about data being available across the organization, right? So it's an AI centered organization. And like this concept of silo busting from this data, right? Could you talk a little bit more about some work at Samvid that you guys are doing at this point that is kind of organizations, like you said, some of these medium and even larger organizations that have such siloed departments. Sales does not talk to marketing. Marketing does not talk to operations. Operations doesn't talk to accounting, legal, and so on, right? So having that data fluidity across all these channels is important. So yeah,
yeah,
please share.
absolutely. I think that is a very important part of being able to sort of make real progress here, right? And the way I like to talk about it is traditionally, I think when we implemented software systems of any kind, there was a lot of emphasis on, and it was not wrong. I mean, I think a lot of emphasis on it was the right thing to do. It was emphasis on changing processes, changing workflows to actually to implement the software. I think that process though can be very painful because I think it takes
Yeah.
a lot of effort to actually change existing workflows. What we at Samvid actually advocate is we don't believe in this idea that we need to go in and modify someone's workflow. I think they need to see the value in changing their workflow eventually. So I think that the way to think about it is there might be some sort of system of record or an existing workflow, and we are perfectly fine with that. So to give you two examples, so let's say we're talking about contracts and invoices. Now the people managing the contracts and the people managing the invoices could be two separate groups, right?
Correct. Yep.
And they might live in two different systems, right? A very rudimentary way of accomplishing sort of like the silo busting here would be, hey, you tell both the departments, look, I don't want you to like work with me on a complex integration. All I want you to do is download the stuff from wherever you have it, or maybe, and in some cases, they don't even have it on a system. They have it in
Yeah.
their own OneDrive folders, right?
Right.
Our point is, don't worry about that. Put it on a set of folders that I think is convenient to you. We will just pick it up from there, and our agentic models will actually pick the data up and actually connect the dots autonomously, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This itself is a big game changer because the minute you're saying this, you're saying that I don't have to work with sort of like, I'm going to say the I here is the business user. I'm not going to have to sit with you and figure out exactly how these data points actually connect. You're going to be able to do that right off the bat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first step, which is basically now these are more like document style data, which may reside in the system or may just be in a set of folders. But I think once you have access to those folders, we can connect the dots. So that's one thing. And if it's, let's say, more a traditional system like an ERP or a TMS, that's fine. You need that system because that's your system of record. I'm not going to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to replace a system of record. What I really want to say is keep your systems of record. And today, by the way, with the entire MCP server technology that
Mm-hmm.
everyone's now beginning to implement, what you can do is the MCP server has agents that can actually go. If I'm working with a company, it's becoming easier and easier for companies to stand up their own MCP servers, and all we need to do is the MCP server then has agents that can actually go into a system of record, pull the data that as and when needed, and pull
Yep.
it back, and then connect the dots, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so I think we are going to make significant progress in silo busting over the next few years. Certainly, Samvid as a company is going to be part of that revolution very closely because, and by the way, going back to this thing, somebody might ask the question, what about workflows? I mean, maybe the workflows that people have are not that great to begin with. That's fine. But I would like them to modify the work. So once you start sort of showing them the value of, of the data, they might actually they will start changing their workflows on their own because they're able to see. So I would rather that the workflow follows the sort of like the data visibility rather than like the other way around, because
Totally.
and that's the sort of the reversal of sequence that we're really going for.
Yeah. I mean, you're building from the ground up with AI rather than trying to set up your own systems.
Absolutely, that's a perfect, yeah, absolutely. And so being that AI native, and rather than slapping on AI on top of an existing system of record just like that, is I think is the key to actually accomplishing that. Yeah.
Absolutely. 100% is so we've talked a lot about this throughout the podcast, but we have these concepts. We hear the word buzzword AI all over news, all over media and everything. But what does that actually mean, right? So we talked a little bit about some of these. So if you could provide a little bit of context to the listeners between what LLMs, large language models, versus Gen AI versus Agentic AI, and kind of where AI is going, and what are those delineations? That would be helpful.
Absolutely. But to really understand LLMs, you have to go back even further back in history, right? Models that can work with numbers have been around for a long time. So think of a typical sort of, demand forecasting exercise. If you had historical sales data, I could use that sales data to actually forecast future demand and get a baseline estimate of exactly how demand will work. And so that's a form of AI model, and many related models have been around for a very long time. The big change was, and something that we have been trying to do for a long time, is computers that can actually um, speak with you the way a human being would in natural language.
Yes.
That has been a goal for the last 50, 60, 80 years. And why is that important? One is, of course, it sounds exciting. It's a science fiction thing. And as I've been talking throughout this conversation, I think it's also incredibly important from a business standpoint, because, as I said, most of the time in businesses, we are all it's not just the numbers, right? It's the numbers, and then we'll have a conversation about the HR implications, the legal implications, and so on. So
Yes.
organizational decisions get made through natural language. They don't get made through numbers. Numbers are just the starting point. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking
Totally.
about data decision. So the final decision is not just a number. It's actually also a human conversation. So this has been an ongoing effort for a long time. And we were trying to tackle it during using methods that were less powerful. And you had ways of, let's say, reading a document, but they were very cumbersome, very hard. And so there was always this view that, okay, let's among many people in the tech community, both in research as well as in industry, we need something better. And so large language models are that breakthrough, right? So the breakthrough is it's a confluence of powerful compute, availability of data on the internet, which is used to train on, and essentially then combining all of those things with this deep learning architecture, which now works very well on this compute, especially the transformer architecture that Google came up with in 2017. And so that resulted in this ability now to actually create a computer that actually can or an app that can actually talk back at you almost like a human being would. And that's what a large language model really is at the end of the day. Right. So, but then that opens up all of these possibilities, because now what we're saying is, if large language models can actually sort of like speak in human language, can understand human language, can also generate human language, can communicate with you in human language,
Right.
what else can we do? And
Right.
that leads you to this agentic revolution, right? Because what are agents at the end of the day? Agents are basically responding. So we've always had software that can do very specialized tasks, but could those tasks actually respond to human commands? They couldn't. You usually needed a button, right? You'd go in and you'd say, okay, here's a button. I click that. I execute a task, right? You say, I want to go buy something. You go buy. You say, you click a buy button. It executes a task. What are agents capable of? I can just speak into something and say, hey, go buy me this coffee maker from Amazon. And
Yes.
I need the price of this coffee maker to be between, I don't know, $50 to $100. Throw a number, right? And so now this agent is able to understand what I said, and is able to convert that into an instruction, which it can actually go out there in the world and execute.
Yes.
And that is something that was not feasible before. And it's so you see the progression moving from structured data to natural language, which is difficult. But then you had LLMs, or computers that can actually, or apps that can actually sort of work with natural language. That opens the possibility for creating these agents that can actually respond to your human communication and execute on tasks.
Yeah. Wow. It's very it's a very it feels like we had a slow burn up until about 2017, 2018, and then it's just been an explosion of new tech and an application I would say that we've never had
Yeah.
in times past.
Absolutely, but to be honest, Manjot, I think the this slow burn followed by exponential rise. This is not the first time it's happening. I mean, if you look at like the internet, there was a people don't realize it, but there was a slow burn of the internet itself for like 20, 30 years. People in the
Hmm.
universities had the early internet system, the 60s and 70s. It was only in the 90s that it just became like this consumer thing, right? Mobile tech, same thing. I mean, mobile phones were around for 20 years before the iPhone really exploded onto the scene, right?
Right.
And this I see the same evolution here, maybe on the slightly longer time scale, simply because a lot of other things have to line up in a row. So for example, I don't think without the internet you could actually have had large language models. So you needed
Yes.
that first, and then you need the tech,
Totally.
the hardware tech also. So many things had to line up, of course. Yeah. By the way, I wouldn't discount on these serendipitous sort of things that happen, right? Who would have imagined that gaming, the world of
Right.
gaming would give rise to technology that would be
Totally.
useful for AI. I mean, Nvidia would never have imagined that they would have be using their chips for AI, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
they were purpose built for games. I mean, I think that is
Totally.
yeah,
But the amount of the complexity to these chips that was needed to create these worlds within games just naturally, to your point, it's very serendipitous, but it did lend itself very well to this new revolution. So kind of shifting gears a little bit from the technology to the people, right? A lot of times we hear AI is going to replace jobs, and to a certain extent, it does automate certain portions of certain jobs or all of some jobs, but there's still very much a need for humans in the loop and also folks that are able to operate, make decisions, write commands, and so on and so forth to these platforms. How do you see that synergy evolving, and what would you say to those folks that are anti AI?
yeah, yeah. And I think when we're anti AI, we tend to forget the fact that let's go back to the framework that we're using. I mean, so the data to decision framework we talked about earlier, right? And one of the things I mentioned is that there are so many steps involved in going from data to decision, a lot of which is grunt work. And you could ask the question, do human beings want to be doing that grunt work?
Correct.
What we
Yeah.
want to be doing is still exercising judgment in making the final decision. And so the way I would couch this is there are, in the data to decision cycle, the final decision is often sort of is going to squarely be in the hands of the human being. Now, the reason I use the word often is you could, as a human being, decide that there are some instances where, hey, I
Mhm.
know exactly what the answer should be here, and the AI system can figure it out on its own. So I'm just going to give you like, for the next 1 year, don't even talk to me about this, just make the decision and move on because I know you're going to do the right thing. And it's been certified by me. Boom. Right. There is still that certification aspect. Even if you're not excising the actual decision, you're basically certifying the AI system to go ahead and make the decision on its own. Right.
Yeah.
Now, now what that means is that if I'm able to compress the data to decision cycle using AI, what AI has actually done is it's played the role of a cognitive amplifier, which is that as a human decision maker, I don't have to spend 8 hours on from data to decision. I need to spend only 1 hour on it, which means I can actually now explore three different pathways.
Yep.
Yeah. So, which means that I can say, if I have 8 hours in my day, first of all, earlier I could do only one pathway in like 8 hours. Now I could actually do three, and I still have 5 hours left, right? To do other things, so to other more value added things, other creative things, and so which means that that's the cognitive amplification part of this, right? So I really think that viewing this as a cognitive amplifier is step one. Step two is even after you've made the decision, we all make mistakes and sometimes even elementary mistakes simply because we are great at sort of the big picture sometimes, and we're not that great at sometimes analyzing some of the little details, like we miss something, like when we actually executed on something, right? So, and I think the second role that AI can play is that of a guardian angel, which is basically like be in the background, and its
Mhm.
whose role is essentially to come back and say, hey, you made this decision, but do you realize that if you did this, there's something you missed here,
Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe you should go revisit that. Okay, so I go and revisit that, and it kind of like it saves me from like making a mistake that might have been like have had some really bad consequences, right? And so when you frame it that way, we don't think about AI as sort of taking over our jobs, but it's something that amplifies who we are and also serves as a guardian angel when you need it to be, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's
totally.
the framework I would go in with.
And exactly to that point, viewing it as one of the best assistants that you could ever have is the right way to frame it. And this technology, that's the like counter to this would be like not to use it. That's the equivalent of, in the 2000s saying, I don't want to use the internet. The revolution is coming. Let's,
See,
let's,
here's the thing, and I would urge at an individual level. Companies are feeling it already, but I think even at an individual level, right, there is a competitive element here. I mean, if you are not using it, you can decide not to use it, and that's fine. But somebody who's using it to amplify their productivity is going to be done in 3 hours when you're working 8.
yeah,
And
more.
by the way, as I mentioned, the example I gave you, in those 3 hours, they have actually done it 3 times over. They have looked at 3 different things, not just one.
Right,
So, yeah.
right. Absolutely. Percent. So let's give us a future state. So I mean, no one can predict the future, but you've been in this business and in this world for quite some time. So if we fast forward, not too far ahead, but maybe like in the next 5 years to 2030, what do you see? What does an AI centered logistics or supply chain company look like to you? What are those key points
Yeah.
that they'll have?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would say is, let's look at the entire cycle, right? So going from, let's say, procurement to execution, I certainly see that in logistics, the procurement function of procuring, let's say, a logistics service, for instance, right,
Hmm.
is actually going to be, and vice versa, from a logistics company's perspective, they're trying to like sort of sell it to, let's say a manufacturer or something. I think that entire procurement function is going to get automated by agents. So what that means is that, I mean, there will be people involved who will have to sign off on things and will have to, like, say, here are the guardrails, but nobody wants to get into, like, a 100 email negotiation round with someone.
Right.
And that part, there are going to be agents on both sides that are going to do it. Okay. Because the agents know the company's parameters. They know how to negotiate. They're going to negotiate fast. And, negotiations are going to get completed like,
Seconds.
1 week with 100 emails. It's going to get completed in, like, in an hour, maybe. So that's one. If you come to inside the business, we already have AI models, the traditional AI models that are already automating the structured data, looking at routing and all of that. If you're going to add the layer of sort of co-pilots that are basically going to be looking at your unstructured data,
Hmm.
your contracts, and all of the other data, the natural language data that surrounds it, and sort of combine that in the decision making. What it's going to enable is really this ability for users to deal with situations that are out of the ordinary, which is that if something changed, if, the example I gave earlier, if the Suez Canal shut down and my supply stopped, how do I reallocate my capacity? And that was a very hard decision. People had to do a very much an intuitive decision. That's not going to be an intuitive decision anymore. It's going to be driven by data, because the AI is going to give you options. It's going to say, it's going to understand your predicament. It's also going to, even if you word it in natural language, understand that and give you back, potential options. So that's second. And then finally, I think once you start executing, I think our monitoring efforts are going to get a lot better, in the sense that, as you sell to customers, as you're monitoring exactly what's happening, I think all of that is the quality of the products that we go move out. Exactly.
Hmm.
Are we invoicing people correctly? All of that stuff is going to improve by leaps and bounds. So I see every task in the supply chain being amplified, the quality of decision making being amplified by agents, and in some cases even almost to the point of, like, the human being is only like rubber stamping or certifying the decision, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. You can make data decisions very fast. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Awesome. Well, I think this is about time for us, and I really appreciate you coming on. And this is a very insightful conversation for me, and hopefully for those that will listen to this podcast will have the same experience. Thank you for all your knowledge and insight. If you want to close us out with any last words, we can stop here.
Thank you so much, Manjot, for this wonderful opportunity. If there is one line I would say, is that don't be afraid of AI. I think embrace it, keeping in mind that it is going to be your cognitive amplifier, and it can also be a great guardian angel. I think if I would want you to remember how to use AI best, those are the two terms I would use.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjot.